This is the Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage show by Mark Helm. Nothing Mark shares with you guarantees your success in the self-storage business. This is for informational purposes only. There are no calls to action, and nothing said or implied is a call for investment money into self-storage or any other asset class. You are responsible for your success in the self-storage business or any endeavor in life. Enjoy the show, and here is Mark Helm.
Hi, this is Mark Helm, and I just got back from the Inside Self-Storage Convention, and there was a lot of talk about development there. I even gave a session on it. But what I thought I'd do in this episode and the next two episodes is outline a development process for the small self-storage developer that works today with the high interest rates, high material cost, high labor cost. My name's Mark Helm. I'm the author of Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, and I'm the creator of the Quick Start Academy, which houses the training that I offer, including how to build your own first self-storage facility that covers this process as well. And you can find out more about the products and services I offer at creatingwealththroughselfstorage.com. Just hit the store section. But what I saw was that a lot of people are on the sidelines today, given kind of which comes out of Washington today, that changes every 5 or 10 minutes, and the tariffs, and a lot of people are just not sure what to do. And that's a valid strategy. I'm not saying you should rush into anything. However, my experience is when other people are on the sidelines, I try to move. So there could be some real opportunities coming along. However, given the high cost of existing self-storage today, a lot of people I'm talking with who are not even in the business are talking about building as a way to get in. Now, this process I'm going to talk about over the next few episodes is good for new development. It also works maybe on a slightly modified level, but it also works for expansions in particular and conversions. Very often in conversions there's no site work, so that portion of it obviously is not relevant here. But I'm going to talk about the development process that a small self-storage investor can use today that actually could allow them to build something that pencils out depending on what the rental rates are in that market area. So today I'm chasing rental rates. Just be aware of that. Rather than just focus on a particular portion of the country, like I did the first couple decades I was in the business, today I'm going I'm going to markets and trade areas where the rates support the cost of construction. So real quickly, here are what we call in our little construction company, the 5 stages of self-storage development. Due diligence, planning and development phase, the development or project approval phase, construction phase, or you could call it construction 1 phase, construction administration and completion phase, and then setting up operations. So these are the phases we go through when we're in the development process for ourselves, or whether our construction company Resolve is working with a client. So what I thought I'd do today is cover the first couple phases. Next week, phase 2 and 3, and then in the final episode, we'll cover the final phase as well as some of the mistakes that we see people making as they develop their first or their next self-storage project. Now again, keep in mind this is all designed for the smaller investor, smaller project, 60, 70,000, 75,000 square feet or less, maybe 1 or 2 story, but not a large 130,000 square foot, 5-story type project. I would do that different than I'm doing what I'm going to be laying out in these next episodes. So let's dive into phase 1. We call this the due diligence and planning and development phase. Just generally in this phase, we see a lot of money wasted here. We see a lot of money wasted that actually kills projects. What we've discovered is that if you use a fabricated system, and I recommend a fabricated system. Why? Well, buyers, especially institutional buyers, would much rather buy on your exit a fabricated system. They know what they're getting. And it's less expensive generally. And there's a lot of products and services that come when you order your fabricated system. We use fabricated systems. And what we discovered is that architects are not necessarily on the same wavelength as the fabricators. And we've seen over and over smaller investors doing their first project, not knowing what to do. They reach out to an architect or an engineer who directs them to an architect and spends a lot of money, and they're not on the same wavelength as a fabricator. Self-storage is different than almost any asset class. If I was building a hotel, if I was building a large shopping center, I would start with an architect. If I was building a 130,000 square foot, 5-story self-storage facility, I'd start with an architect. But when I'm building drive-up self-storage, we do not start with architects. We start with fabricators. Let's look at the process within this first phase. Here are the spaces that need to be covered in the first phase of construction development, in the due diligence phase. Look at the land, analyze the land, get preliminary layouts, get a preliminary pro forma, then control the property if you're moving forward, feasibility, and understanding codes in the approval process. So let's talk about each one briefly. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in these episodes, but analyzing the land. We start here. How does it lay? Is there wetlands? Is it rectangular, triangular? How will storage begin to lay out? Is there a lot of elevation? Is it wooded? We begin to look at the land and see how well it's suited for a self-storage project or a boat and RV project, if that's what you're doing. And in our development process, the engineer is a key team member. In a perfect world, we want the engineer to be local, understand the local codes, hopefully has done self-storage before, and most importantly, knows the process and the players, the personalities involved at the regulatory level of that county or municipality who is going to be doing the development and approval process. We use the engineers most of the time to drive the approval process, not architects, not lawyers. Now I'm going to assume this land is zoned for self-storage. I personally have never taken a project through rezoning to do a self-storage project. We work with people who have, and they've been successful. But typically, I don't have the time or the patience or the money to do that. So I'm looking for land that is zoned. Now, sometimes we have to get conditional use permits or special use permits. Your engineer will tell you. But that's just our process. I'm looking for land that's already zoned, and I don't have to go through that step. That step's not included in our development process. Then after we analyze the land, we send a survey or a site layout of the boundaries to a fabricator, and a fabricator will lay out a preliminary plan. You know, we tell them what we want. We think we're going to do 50% non-climate control, 50% climate control. We're not sure yet, but this is what we think we're going to do. Whatever it is that you think will go in there, and we have subscription services, and we will analyze that market using that subscription service to kind of come up with what we think might be the best type project: climate control, non-climate control, parking, etc. Now the fabricators will typically their engineering department will do a preliminary layout. We may react to that layout, and then once we get something that we think looks okay, then we will run that by our engineer that we have been selecting and interviewing in the initial phases of this stage of development. And the engineer will kind of react to it, make sure the fire lanes are right, truck turnarounds. They'll be looking at it from the point of view, does this layout functionally work, and how will the regulatory agencies that he's going to be presenting this to respond to it? So notice the engineer, the architect is not creating the plans, they're reacting to the plans. At this stage, we haven't even talked to an architect yet. Also, we're doing a preliminary pro forma. At first, it's square footage of storage and a per square foot rate for climate control and non-climate control and parking. And once we get a layout that we like, then we start inserting that unit mix. There's a lot of episodes out there that cover how to do a pro forma, so I'm not going to go into it here. But just know that that's a living, breathing document for us during the entire process up until the point we start construction. What we're doing is each step of the way that performance is getting revised and revised as our assumptions get replaced with real numbers. Know before you start what your benchmark numbers are. What's a deal you would do? What's a deal you would not do? Cash on cash return, equity created, internal rate of return, whatever your benchmark numbers are, know what they are. And don't do what even I have a tendency to do sometimes, especially if I'm excited about the project, which is tweak the construction numbers, get bullish on my assumptions to make sure I hit those benchmark numbers. Whatever it comes out to be, it comes out to be. Now, I don't do at this stage, I'm not doing an overly aggressive assumptions, and I'm not doing pessimistic assumptions. I'm doing kind of middle of the road. I'll run stress tests later on. But right now, I'm just kind of average. Average lease up. I'm not above the market. I'm not significantly below the market on my rental rates. Then, after talking with the engineer, getting the preliminary layout, the pro forma looks good, I try to control the property. We've got a lot of episodes on that, but using an LOI and a contract. We start with the letter of intent, then move to the contract. Our goal is to control that property for a known number for the right period of time. What's the right period of time? Well, it depends. It depends on where you are. The right period of time in a perfect world is long enough to get your development approval and your building plan approval and your site work approval. We can't always get that. Sometimes we got to buy additional time in a contract to get that. But that's the goal here. You've heard people say that you make your money when you buy the property. I suggest you make your money when you write your letter of intent. That's where we think through. We know the time frames. We think through the deal structure. We think, what can we offer the seller? Usually it's money. Sometimes it's something else. What can we offer that seller to make the deal work for them and for us? Immediately, once we execute a contract, the very next thing we execute is a letter of engagement that we've been talking to the feasibility report providers for the last week or so while we're negotiating the contract. We get that feasibility report ordered immediately within 60 seconds of executing the contract. Why? Well, it's a longer lead time item, sometimes 3 to 6 weeks. And we will not move forward unless we get an independent third party, somebody with no dog in the fight, not your GC and his company doing the feasibility report, not your consultant doing the feasibility report, an independent third-party feasibility report specialist. You can go to creatingwealththroughselfstorage.com, hit the resource pages, see who we use, but don't go with the cheapest, go with the best. In many cases, these are 7-figure projects, and you want a dang good report. You don't want the cheapest report. And the last And the last thing I'll say about this phase of the process is understand the codes. I never cease to be amazed how many people don't really understand or read the development codes in the county where they're building. Now, I know you're going to have an engineer, you may have a GC, you may have a construction manager, but still, it's your deal. It falls on you. Understand the codes, download them, read them, ask questions for which you don't understand. Ask your engineer, ask your GC, call the county up and talk to them. But read and understand the codes. Ultimately, using this development process, it's your responsibility. This process isn't like talking to a general contractor saying, give me a number, then you take a vacation and come back and it's built. We're doing, as an owner, small investor, you are very involved in the project using this development process. Why? Well, it keeps the cost down. And it makes the difference of whether people like us can actually construct a deal today or not. Now, the next phase of construction is what we call the development and or project approval phase. So we've done our due diligence, we've got our site layout, we kind of know what we're building, we're controlling the property, we've got a feasibility report in or coming in. Now we start working towards having the county approve the project, not the building plans, not the site disturbance permit, but yes, you can do that project on this site. Again, in almost all cases, for us, in this development process, the civil leads that charge to get the approval, not the architect. Let's talk about the phases or spaces to move through in this stage of the development. And I only put 3 down, but they encompass a lot. There's the survey or reports phase, there's the site plan phase, and then there's the getting the project approved phase. So, in almost every case, your civil engineer is going to tell you you need a new survey, and almost every case you're going to need a topo. Somebody go out there to shoot the elevations of the site so that the civil at some point can do the site work drawings. We've always gotten a geotech report that talks about that tests the compaction of the soil. And in our contracts, we typically ask for an environmental report. If there's not an environmental report, we get one. Now, I know I've talked with some people out there that will argue with me that if they're not required to get an environmental report, they don't want to because they don't want to know what's under the ground. I do. I want to know what's there. I want to make an educated decision whether I want to go entitle to that property because of the potential liability that's involved in environmental problems. So very often we're able to get the environmental report from the seller. The seller, we can update it or give it to the lender. The lender may require us to update it. The lender may not. They may do their own little desktop type study and use our environmental report. But whatever it is, I want to know. If a seller won't let me do an environmental report because they don't want to know if there's anything under the ground in their project, I walk from the project. That's just a given for me. That's a hard no. I need to know, and I usually have other people or partners' money involved. I need to know what I'm stepping into. I'll get off my soapbox now. Now, typically to get development approval, you need a site plan with more than just a layout. This is where we start engaging the architect. Now, in a perfect world, you will have an architect who has development experience. They don't even have to be a local architect. Our architects are out of California, but has self-storage experience, preferably on an hourly basis. If not on an hourly basis, then in the development and project approval phase, this is what we'll charge. And again, your architect is not creating, they're reacting. So we give them the site layout. They will create what's needed as directed by the civil engineer who's leading the approval process, what's needed to get development approval at this stage. Usually it's more enhanced layout with drive lanes, turnarounds, that type of thing, and it's 3D renderings. Keep your renderings as generic as possible. Sometimes the civil has to do full site work plans. In most cases, no, but some, so they can talk about water retention, water drainage, etc. But whatever is needed to get the development approval, that's what we pay for. And our fabricators will typically give us a layout on paper and also in CAD format. So we give that to the engineers and the architects at this stage. I want to spend just the amount of money I need. I don't need 75% CD documents now. I want to spend just the amount of money I need to get development and project approval. Here's a pro tip. In our development process, the fabricator creates the engineered building plans. Typically how it works is they'll give you a bid for the storage system, and then you got to pay a deposit. After the deposit's paid and you're in the construction queue for fabrication, that's when they start on the plans. We'd like to work with fabricators who will allow us to pay a portion of that deposit at this stage of the game, or once we have an accepted contract, and that's usually non-refundable money to us, but they will go on and start the engineered building plans in paper and CAD format. And then once we get development approval, that's when we go in the queue for fabrication. And we'll pay a portion of that deposit to go on and get the plans, and then once we get development approval, we pay the balance and we're in the queue for fabrication. Not everyone will do that, but that's a pro tip. Many of them will. The ones we work with will, and use that if it can help you. It saves money with architects and engineers. You're going to get it anyway, and it's included in the price of your fabrication. Our goal is to spend the minimum amount of money needed to get to the project development approval process. Why? Because that's our at-risk money. If we don't get it, or in order to build it, we got to do X, Y, and Z and build brick and masonry, and just if it ends up not working, whatever we spend to get to this level is at-risk money. We don't typically get it back. So that's our development process. What I'm seeing is we can save 30 to 50% of what it costs if you just run to an architect and start getting plans right out of the chute. This process will take a little longer. It takes a little longer to get a shovel in the ground, but given the cost of construction and material today and the interest rates, I'm willing to save the money and add a little time to the project. So the engineer will present it, get development approval. If there's anything else that we've got to do to fancy the building up, change elevations on the building, change the type fencing we want to use, whatever the county comes back with, we throw an estimate number in our pro forma and see if the numbers still work. The goal here in this phase is to get the development approval. Then we can turn everybody loose. And what that usually means is we turn the civil loose to finish the site work drawings. We get in the fabrication queue, and then we turn the architect loose to take the CAD format we've gotten from our fabricator and start dropping in and creating stamped building plans that the county or the regulatory agency will approve. We'll talk about that next week. So in conclusion, next week we'll talk about the two kind of construction phases. And remember, this is designed for the smaller investor in mind. This also, again, works for expansions and conversions. It's maybe slightly modified or easier, especially for conversions. But we've seen way too much money spent in these first two phases, and the person can't go forward. Or they've got so much money in it, they've got to go forward on a project they shouldn't go forward on. If you're unsure where to start, call somebody. Don't call an architect. Call a consultant, somebody like us, or there's other people out there. Call a consultant. owner's representative. Call someone to get started if you're not sure what to do. My coaching is just don't call an architect and say, here's a site I'm interested in, give me a layout. You'll be spending way more money than you need to. And again, in a world where construction interest rates are 7.5 plus, construction costs are high, labor costs are high, every cent makes a difference of whether we can do a project or not. So I look forward to being with you next week as we move forward on the development process for the small self-storage investor, and I'll see you then.